Good day. My name is Ben Neufeld. I'm on staff here at Riverwood, and it's my privilege to conclude our series titled So Lost Without You. Have you ever been lost as a kid? Or you parents, have you ever had one of your kids get lost? When I was young, I was the kid who hid behind cereal boxes in the grocery stores. Or sometimes I backed into the clothes rack real slowly when my mom wasn't looking. I was also the kid that didn't come out right away, even if my mom might have been getting a little frantic. It was fun for me. I wasn't really lost. I was always close, quietly laughing at my mom's worry and probably not picking up the cues when it was time to stop. I looked forward to when I could jump out at the right time and startle whoever was looking for me. I was never very far, and because I usually couldn't wait to show myself, the whole ordeal never went on all that long. Our two oldest boys, Asher and Cole, are both quite outgoing. As kids, you could usually hear them coming and going. They always liked to be around people. They were naturally always quite loud, and like me, probably found it hard to stay quiet and actually hide or get lost. But then there are those other kids who are not as loud. They can wander off, confident on their own and not too worried about the outcome. My wife Ingrid and I might have been more aware parents for the early two. Maybe we were a little more careful. Parents here of multiple children, maybe you can relate. As other kids show up, we might just get a little more relaxed. We might not be quite as concerned. Or maybe that next kid is just different than we're used to. Well, meet Creston. Creston walked around and did things like nothing really bothered him. He was a touch quieter than his brothers and definitely not as extroverted. He was content and often quite happy to be on his own. When our kids were young, we lived in Kansas for a number of years. Creston was about 15 months old, and we took our three boys downtown Kansas City to go ice skating. We had never been there before, but we went with friends, and of course, us Canadians wanted to find a place to try ice skating with our kids, especially in Kansas. We parked in a large parkade downtown and had a great time ice skating. We were taking off our skates, and then we realized our youngest Creston was gone. Like, turn around one time and he's gone. Creston, at 15 months old, was lost downtown Kansas City in a place we had never been before. Of course, we start looking, checking all around the rink. My wife Ingrid has her skates half untied and is frantically hobbling around trying to find him. We couldn't see him anywhere. He was lost. Now, obviously we found him. I just showed you a picture of him so we can all take a deep breath. He's fine. But after what seemed like forever to us, but was probably only about a minute or two, we see a big man walking towards us with Creston in his arms. He passes Creston to Ingrid and I, who are now the happiest parents in the world. The man had found Creston wandering around the parkade in amongst the cars. What a terrible place for a 15-month-old to be. We never got an answer for why he left. Did he think he was still walking with the family? Did he get distracted? Did he just get turned around and start heading in the wrong direction? We're not sure. He had just gotten lost. Over the last number of weeks, we looked at some different perspectives to the word lost. We set out to define the term lost, realizing that we're all lost, but have been granted access to God's favor and given the ability to walk in God's freedom. We've asked the questions: is the world really lost? Is that an outdated thought? Why does nobody like evangelism anymore? And what can we do to change that and do it right? And last week, we looked at what we are missing, what we think we need in comparison to what we are being offered by Jesus: forgiveness, peace, hope, and purpose. As a church, we are reading a chapter a day, our version 2.0, called A Year with Jesus. Everyone can feel free to jump in with us, and we will continue on this year. This week, in the book of Luke, starting in chapter 22, we've seen some of the most personal, impactful, and intense times between Jesus and his disciples. These were Jesus' closest friends, his companions, the people Jesus trusted the most, and some of the folks that would eventually be the most influential people in carrying on the work of Jesus after he was gone. These are the ones that have seen miracles firsthand. They saw people being healed and raised from the dead, thousands being fed with just a handful of food. They've seen people's lives being radically changed, and the lowest of the low being given value and worth, forgiveness and purpose. All of this with so much compassion from Jesus. In the last chapters of the book of Luke, we read that Jesus is teaching, caring, and confiding in his disciples. But after all the disciples have seen, heard, and experienced, there is a hard turn in the wrong direction towards betrayal, desertion, and denial. Jesus is arrested by the religious authorities who are afraid of Jesus and his teachings. Judas, one of Jesus' disciples, agrees to help those trying to kill Jesus. He helped them make sure they could get him alone and take him away in private when no one else could see. Jesus' friends then scatter and leave, and Peter, arguably his best friend in the world, denies even knowing him multiple times when cornered. This is all shortly after Peter said he would go all the way supporting Jesus, whether it be to prison or even death. As I went back and read these chapters again, I saw that even while Jesus is talking about his own betrayal, some of the disciples start fighting about who among them will be the greatest beside Jesus. And this wasn't even the first time this argument had come up. It seemed to be a theme among some of Jesus' followers. It was fought about 13 chapters earlier in chapter 9. This is also another time when Jesus was once again predicting his own betrayal and death. In this chapter, Jesus has just performed miracles and has the attention of his followers. We read in verse 44, "Listen to me and remember what I say." Another version says, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies." But they didn't know what he meant. Its significance was hidden from them, so they couldn't understand it. And they were afraid to ask him about it. Instead of listening to him and remembering what he said, they seemed to break out into a disagreement. Verse 46, "Then his disciples began arguing about which one of them was the greatest. But Jesus knew their thoughts, so he brought a little child to his side. Then he said to them, 'Anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me also welcomes my Father who sent me. Whoever is the least among you is the greatest.'" Fast forward to chapter 22, verse 21. During the Lord's Supper, Jesus says in verse 21, "But here at this table, sitting among us as a friend, is the man who will betray me. For it has been determined that the Son of Man must die. But what sorrow awaits the one who betrays him?" The disciples began to ask each other which one of them would ever do such a thing. So Jesus is talking about his betrayal and death for another time, but the disciples seem to go in the wrong direction again and go back to one of their more pressing topics, titled, "Who's the Best?" Verse 24, "Then they began to argue among themselves about who would be the greatest among them. Jesus told them, 'In this world, the kings and great men lord it over their people, yet they are called friends of the people. But among you, it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. Who is more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, of course, but not here. For I am among you as one who serves.'" I found myself asking why. Why do these 12 guys and Jesus followers seem to miss it? To lose what's important. They seem to constantly lose their bearings and head in the wrong direction. These are the ones closest to Jesus, the ones who walked with him on this earth, who spent all their time with him, who got to see firsthand the Son of God operate with power and authority, with very tangible things happening all around them. So many times it seems like the words, teachings, and directions of Jesus go right over their heads. Why do they miss it? Why do they go in the wrong direction? They seem so lost. So, quick sidebar here. When I read the Bible, I'm often surprised by how people in these stories often miss the point. But I'm also relieved. If the people who walked and talked with Jesus while he was on this earth can mess it up and then be trusted with sharing the good news of Jesus and leading his church, if these folks can be given grace even when they lose their direction over and over again, then I know that there is grace for me, for us. The real opportunity here is to learn from these stories as we attempt to follow and know Jesus more. Well, we move on in the story to Jesus being brought before the authorities, accused of crimes by leaders who didn't want to lose their influence and power, and was eventually crucified. Jesus' disciples and those who followed Jesus, along with some of his family, watched from a distance. I'm sure they had so many questions, feeling about as lost as anyone could, truly not understanding what had gotten them to this point, realizing they were not where they thought they'd be, and convinced they were not supposed to end up here. They had lost what had grounded them. Away from Jesus, their constant, their teacher, and their friend, they were about as far away from what they had been used to with Jesus. Following the death of Jesus, many of his disciples were hiding. They did not want anyone finding them because they were afraid of what would happen to them. Let's pick up the story in Luke 24. But very early on Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone that had been rolled away from the entrance, so they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. As they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. Then the men asked, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the third day." Then they remembered that he had said this. So they rushed back from the tomb to tell his 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and several other women who told the apostles what had happened. But the story sounded like nonsense to the men, so they didn't believe it. At this point, there is obviously no expectation that the disciples will believe or understand that Jesus is risen. There's no previous behavior that would suggest otherwise. Even when Jesus himself told them, they did not understand. When the disciples weren't debating about their own greatness, it seemed like they just didn't hear or understand Jesus, especially at the most crucial times. Luke 9, verse 45, but they didn't know what he meant. Its significance was hidden from them, so they couldn't understand it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. Luke 18, verse 31 to 34. This is when Jesus is talking about his death for about the third time. Taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus said, "Listen, we're going up to Jerusalem, where all the predictions of the prophets concerning the Son of Man will come true. He will be handed over to the Romans, and he will be mocked, treated shamefully, and spit upon. They will flog him with a whip and kill him, but on the third day he will rise again." And here's the key in verse 34. But they didn't understand any of this. The significance of his words were hidden from them, and they failed to grasp what he was talking about. So there are a few thoughts as to why people believe that Jesus' words were lost on his disciples. One, some say it was because the disciples couldn't have been able to handle the truth yet, so it was not revealed to them. Others say it's because they only saw Jesus as an earthly king and were only thinking about how they fit in the kingdom he would build. And three, they just couldn't see how what Jesus was saying could fit into God's plan. And there are a bunch of other speculations, but today I want to ask a few questions of us. What is the picture of Jesus that we have in our minds? What do we see? Do we see a good teacher? Do we see a savior? Do we just see a good example? Do we see a friend? Or do we see a king? Do we focus on our place rather than his place in our lives? Does it change how we interact with others, our family, friends, coworkers, neighbors? Do we want our idea of Jesus to fit into our plan, or are we willing to align with his plan, even when it seems completely off from ours? I'm going to jump to about 13 years ago. My son Creston has turned 2, maybe 2.5, and is here in Manitoba with Ingrid and his other siblings, visiting family who live beside a farm with a significant amount of heavy equipment and quite a large amount of surrounding fields. Creston is still not concerned about much, happy on his own, and a pretty confident kid. He also likes dogs at this time, and they have a big dog that's black and hairy. Its name is Midnight, and he liked to play with Midnight. Well, Midnight and Creston go for a walk. It's quite a long walk that leads Creston out of the yard, into the farm, and then they're gone. This farm is not a place for kids. It's a busy farm with combines, tractors, spreaders, other equipment, and a bunch of buildings. Well, he's noticed missing, and the search is on. It does not end in a few seconds or minutes. It starts to go on for quite some time. This is with quite a few people out looking for him, calling for him, and going in all different directions. Midnight shows up, but Creston is nowhere to be found. Things are getting pretty frantic amongst those searching for him. The time drags on and on with no one finding him, till eventually someone finally hears a child cry out. Creston had gone with Midnight out of the yard and was on the far side of the farm. He had followed the dog down into a very deep drainage ditch, out of sight from anyone that would be passing by, and sunk deep in the mud at the bottom of the drainage ditch. He was unable to get out. When Midnight left, he was alone. He didn't know where he was afraid, and he was stuck, completely lost. Without help, he couldn't have gotten out from where he was. Well, this all leads us to the last part of our story in Luke. Jesus has been buried. His followers feel alone. They're afraid. They have lost their direction and don't know what's next, and they can't seem to see a way out from where they are. Their reality has gone from, "Here is the Lord among us," to, "Where is he?" And to, "Was he even really who he said he was? Was he really the Lord?" 2 of Jesus' disciples are walking to a village named Emmaus. They're away from Jerusalem, and Jesus joins them. In chapter 24, verse 15, while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things have happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Just a couple quick observations before we wrap up. Their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Again, there are a few thoughts about why they were kept from seeing him. Was it that Jesus wanted them to hear his teaching and not be distracted by seeing him raised from the dead? Was it that they were so focused on their disappointments and sadness that they did not expect to see Jesus, so they completely missed him? Or was it that Jesus was so different, so transformed after being raised from the dead, that his new body did not resemble that of his old one? I think one of the things that struck me the most was how, even though Jesus called them foolish, his rebuke was one that drew them in rather than pushed them away. From the words he said, they desired to know more. They did not want him to leave. How quick are we to rebuke harshly, to talk down to others who we feel just don't get it, who maybe don't see things the same way we do, who seem to miss the point or get it wrong. From here, Jesus appears to more of his disciples, and over the next number of days, gives people an opportunity to see him, to rebuild relationships with him. And we'll get a chance to see a lot more of this in the book of John, and we've just started reading that together as a church. Where the disciples felt lost, Jesus gives them direction and purpose. Where they felt they had lost their way, he restored them and showed compassion and love, even when he put them in their place. So, I should confirm that Creston was finally found and pulled out of a ditch. I should also mention that he doesn't wander off, get lost, and get stuck in ditches anymore. You know, he's 15 now, so we're kind of glad about that. I often feel like what I learn from my kids are good illustrations. And I've learned a ton about the character of God and how he works from all 5 of my children. So let me ask you, where are you today? 1, do you sometimes feel like you went down a path, lost your way, got stuck in a muddy ditch, not knowing how to get out? Or maybe, do we have blinders on because we're more worried about our place on this earth rather than Jesus' place in our lives? Or do we miss what God is trying to do in us because it doesn't line up with what we thought or what we know was supposed to happen? There's a huge amount of times that I can point to where things didn't go my way, and I didn't realize God was working till way later. Or lastly, maybe you just feel lost, without hope. You don't really know Jesus, but you want to know him more. The first thing we can do is just call out to him. Ask him to change us and then follow after him. Let's pray. God, we need you each and every day. Thank you that you love us and that you care for us and that you sent your son Jesus to earth so that we could have full relationship with you. Thanks for the example that Jesus is to each one of us. I pray that the areas where we feel lost or that we've lost our way, we would call out to you. We would depend on you. I pray that we would put you above everything else in our lives, whether it be work, friends, our desires and goals, and that we would realize that your desire for us is to have the fullest life in you. I pray wherever we are in our faith journey, that we would know you more, that we desire to have you change us in every way so that we are able to reflect your love. Amen.